Porsche's M96 and M97 water-cooled flat-six engines are incredibly polarizing. Depending entirely on how they are maintained, they represent either a brilliant sports car bargain or a complete financial trap. To know if this applies to you, we need to define the exact models at risk. The timeline starts with the 1997 through 2008 Boxster. It also covers the flagship carriers of this engine family, the 996 and 997.1 generations of the 911 Carrera. And finally, it includes the later evolution of the platform, the Cayman S. There is one strict boundary here. If you own a 911 Turbo, GT2, or GT3 from this era, your car uses a completely different, race-derived Mezger engine. None of this guide applies to those cars. For everyone else with a standard M96 or M97, following the standard dealer maintenance schedule will eventually destroy your engine. Keeping these flat sixes alive requires a forensic, proactive routine that you simply will not find in the owner's manual. Step 1 is throwing out the factory oil change intervals. Porsche originally told owners they could wait 15,000 miles or 2 years between oil changes, and that the filter didn't even need replacing every time. That interval is highly destructive to this specific block. The absolute baseline rule is to change the oil and the filter every 5,000 miles or 6 months, and always use a proper full synthetic Porsche A40 specification. Next, turn that routine chore into a physical diagnostic habit. Take the used paper oil filter and slice it open. You are looking closely in the folds for any tiny metallic or plastic flakes. Then, add a chemical diagnostic step. Send a small sample of the used oil to a lab for analysis. You need to watch specifically for rising levels of iron and aluminum over time. Combining a physical filter inspection with a chemical lab analysis creates an early warning radar. It allows you to catch internal friction while the engine is still intact and the repair is still relatively cheap. This diagram shows the inside of the flat six block, specifically highlighting the intermediate shaft. This shaft helps drive the camshafts, and at the end sits a sealed bearing. If this bearing fails suddenly, it usually destroys the entire engine. The risk level depends entirely on the year. Cars built from 1997 through 1999 use a robust dual-row bearing that rarely fails. The critically high-risk units are the 2000 through 2005 models. These use a single-row bearing that requires immediate intervention. From 2006 through 2008, Porsche switched to a much larger bearing. While stronger, it cannot be serviced without completely splitting the engine case open. If you have a serviceable car, the solution is straightforward. Install an upgraded aftermarket bearing. Because the engine is already accessible, you should overlap the labor costs and do this at the exact same time you replace the clutch. It is also worth noting that the IMS bearing is highly vulnerable to sitting unused. Treating the car like a garage queen actually accelerates its demise. Regular, spirited driving keeps that bearing continuously lubricated. The next major threat to these blocks is the breakdown of their high-silicon, low-Cassil cylinder walls. This degradation disproportionately targets Bank 2, specifically cylinders 4, 5, and 6, and is most common on the larger 3.4, 3.6, and 3.8-liter engines. The main auditory warning sign is a progressive ticking or knocking sound from the engine. Never let a mechanic wave this away as simply noisy lifters. You can fight this scoring with a preventative trio. First, install a low-temperature thermostat. Second, use the correct oil viscosity. And third, strictly wait for the engine to reach full operating temperature before you drive it aggressively. If you are buying one of these cars, make this a non-negotiable rule. Demand a visual inspection of the cylinders using a borescope camera before you hand over any money. Looking directly at the cylinder walls is the only definitive way to separate a healthy block from an expensive, catastrophic rebuild waiting to happen. There are several peripheral parts that will inevitably fail. The factory water pump uses a plastic impeller that turns brittle. If it shatters, it will overheat the engine. Preventatively replace this pump every 40,000 to 60,000 miles. The air-oil separator, or AOS, usually fails around 80,000 miles. When it pulls oil into the intake, the primary visual alarm is a thick cloud of white exhaust smoke. The rear main seal also has a habit of weeping oil. Don't tear the car apart just for this. Wait and bundle the seal replacement with your next clutch or transmission removal. On an M96 or M97, ignoring cheap aging plastic peripheral parts almost always guarantees the destruction of the highly expensive aluminum block they are attached to. We've covered a lot of ground, so go ahead and pause to capture this master schedule. This graphic replaces the factory manual. At 5,000 miles or 6 months, you do the oil, filter, and lab analysis. Every 2 years, flush the brake fluid and swap the air filters. At 4 years, or roughly 30 to 60,000 miles, depending on your model year, replace the spark plugs and inspect the accessory drive belt for any cracking. Between 40 and 60,000 miles, swap in a fresh water pump, a low-temperature thermostat, and refresh the gearbox oil. Finally, execute that one-time IMS bearing insurance policy if you own a 1997 through 2005 model. This isn't meant to be a burden. This is the exact blueprint used by Porsche specialists to comfortably push these engines well past the 100,000-mile mark. Buying an M96 or M97 is not a lottery ticket. The survival of your engine is directly tied to your willingness to over-maintain the car. Committing to this forensic roadmap secures a real payoff. It transforms a perceived liability into one of the purest, most accessible modern sports car experiences on the planet. The difference between financial ruin and engineering triumph here isn't luck. It's simply doing the work the dealer won't tell you about.